Alright, we got a little protein shake. We got a little protein shake going on.
You are listening to the Beltway Wars Invitational Podcast, with your hosts Adam Jackson and Patrick Wheelton. Enjoy the show.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Week 4 BWI podcast show with your amazing hosts, Adam Jackson and Patrick Wheelton. Here, we are in the thick of playoff baseball, so maybe fantasy football took a little bit of a backseat while we're waiting to see who the Orioles are going to play on Saturday. Saturday also is the Billy Joel concert, so that'll be very interesting in terms of parking whoever's going down Saturday.
My dad and I are going to that game Saturday.
Okay, yeah. Me, Scott, Tom, Charlie are going to go to the game Sunday. So we will be in full attendance there supporting our Orioles, whoever they play against. But let's get to the meat here. Week 4, very interesting week. Two really high scores, and then there were some medium scores. I mean, it was a large scoring affair in Week 4. A lot of players did very, very well, and we kind of got some insight of who is going to be a really fantasy standout superstars this year, who we might not have really thought of, and we'll get into that. But let's get into our first matchup here with Mike versus Brian now. Mike goes 3-1. Brian is now 0-4 on the season. Not looking good for him so far through 4 weeks. Mike won 172.60 to 100.36. Going down Mike's team here, Josh Allen had an amazing game. 21-25, 320 through the air, 4 touchdowns, and 1 rushing touchdown on the day against Miami. He decides to play Devon Achane as his second running back. I know that we talked about that a little bit last week, who he was going to insert there, and it turned out to work really well. Just on 8 carries, 101 yards, and 2 touchdowns on the ground. Very efficient work for the young running back in Miami. Justin Jefferson has a nice game here, 6 for 9, 85 yards, and a touchdown in their win against the Panthers. DJ Moore kind of went with Justin Fields, 8-9, 131 through the air, and a touchdown. And then even the Vikings defense here against Carolina, great matchup, 19 points on the day, 5 sacks, 2 forced fumbles, and a defensive touchdown. So 172, probably one of the season highs in points, and it definitely was a season high for points for Mike. Mike now at 3-1, looking good going into Week 5.
Yeah, it had to be a great game for Mike to watch. If you watched any of the Bills Dolphins game, he gets 36 fantasy points from Allen, and of course the big game for a second week in a row from Achane. And this week there was no Mostert competing for those points. Achane made the most of his 8 carries, going over 100 yards for the second game in a row, involved in the passing game. So all of a sudden, Achane, who comes out of nowhere, puts up 2 monster games and leads the Dolphins running backfield in this week. He's now the number 3, all of a sudden number 3 running back in fantasy. That's 50 points almost last week plus 25. That's 75 points in 2 weeks. So just bananas. And again, doing it only on 8 carries. This is a 14th round pick for Mike that is working out in a major way. He's 3-1. He's looking good. He's, anytime you can have a draft pick that far down in your draft perform like an RB1 is really impressive. Still have questions a little bit about the depth of this team, but as of right now, this starting lineup with Metcalf, Jefferson, DJ Moore having his best game of the season. He's starting to turn it on a little bit. 3 straight games of 10 points or more. Most targets on the year with 9. The Bears offense in a better matchup this week against Denver. This Bears offense has really struggled. They've got some really juicy matchups coming up, so I look forward to seeing what DJ Moore does. But things are looking up for this team. Again, 3-1, a pretty good place to be, and 172 on the scoreboard. Not too shabby for Mike in week 4.
Yeah, I mean, all gold here for Mike. I mean, at 172, that's a huge point total. My question is now going to Travis Etienne here. Gets 8 points here, 15, and then 5, then 18. So very much up and down season, it looks like, for him. Do you see that continuing, or do you see that more of, kind of flattening out here where he gets more consistent production from Travis Etienne? Because it kind of looks like right now, at least, boom, and then basement bust in terms of Travis Etienne. And this is someone that's getting all the carries. I mean, he hasn't had less than 10 attempts on the ground this year, and he looks like he's somewhat involved in the passing game. So do you see more of this week where it's kind of just, middling around, or do you see more of week 1 where he scored 18 points?
I think it's a little bit matchup dependent. I mean, just looking at the greens and reds here in his, the defenses that he's played, his 2 good weeks have come on green, which are good matchups, right? Houston and Indianapolis, at least in terms of the running back position. Kansas City, Atlanta, a little bit stingier on defense against running back. So it might be a little bit matchup dependent. I have concerns generally about Etienne and his viability as a being healthy throughout the course of the year.
Yeah.
He's a little bit on the thinner side, and they're running 20 times a game. A guy that
I wish I was 215. So yeah, I guess we'll say he's on the thinner side.
Well, compared to Tank Bigsby, he is, right. Tank Bigsby is much more prototypical goal line back. So Etienne is always a little bit more nimble. I have questions about just generally the Jacksonville offense.
Yeah.
They look a little bit better here, but they've had a couple games this season where they haven't carried over some of the momentum that they had last season. So a little bit of question marks there. 20 for 55, not very good efficiency for Etienne. So I was not high on him coming into the draft. I think you're just going to get a lot of ups and downs like this. At the end of the year, he'll be a top 20 guy, but he's a 3rd round pick, and he's just not one of those. If he would be better and more consistent, he would be a top 2 round pick. But he falls into the 3rd, and I think it's just going to be boom or bust a little bit.
Yeah, I think the word you're looking for is he is who he is, and this is kind of this is year 3. We've kind of seen what he looks like. Year 1, he was out for actually the entire year, so this is actually his 2nd full year. But I think we've kind of figured out who he is as a player.
Yeah, and I should say, I'll ask you. I mean, if you're redrafting today, is Josh Allen the first quarterback off the board?
Okay, so let's look at his totals here. Week 1 was a struggle, then it went over 20 points, and then had the big point total here. First quarterback off the board.
Look, Mahomes has not looked great this season. He's the number 8 quarterback in fantasy. It's him,
Jalen Hurts, you would think, right?
I guess so.
I think that if you were redrafting through 4 weeks, I think that he is the number 1 quarterback you take off the board. Just with the rushing ability, he already has, in the last 2 weeks, he has a rushing touchdown in each. He 46 and 17 yards. He just has to get those attempts in the red zone to really make him viable to keep his floor from being too low. But yeah, I think he's the number 1 overall quarterback off the board.
Right, to your point, 36 fantasy points. He only threw it 25 times.
Yeah.
Compare that to like Geno Smith, I think, who was Seattle, who threw like 22 passes or something. I think it was Geno. I think, I could be wrong, but not nearly the production that Allen has. And by the way, don't sleep on Mike. He's now the 2nd highest point scoring team in the league. So big props to Mike, and 3-1, looking good moving forward.
And then congratulations to Mike today with the Twins beating the Blue Jays. He is a Twins fan. So going
Oh,
over, go
We're
ahead.
gonna get ready to say, like, he had twins.
No,
I was like,
not that I know of, and not that I
Okay.
don't think that he knows. But that would be, but yeah, the Twins, the baseball team. I
it
should
must
say.
be nice to be in the AL Central. Just
Yeah,
saying.
right, right. Well, going over to Brian here, now in desperate straits here, 0-4 on the season. And I think with that we are looking at his squad here. I mean, the problems are abound. Um, Javon Williams, 2 carries, comes out of the game with an injury. Not expecting to miss too much time, but hasn't been great while he's been on the field. Under 8 points in each of his first 4 matchups. Not looking good there, especially where he was drafted on the board. You're looking at third wide receiver here in flex. Marvin Mims, that's who he goes with. 2 for 2, 47 yards. Denver offense just does not look good. Elijah Moore had 1 carry for minus 20 yards. I don't know if you remember that play, but it was hilarious. It was like an end around. He just kept on running backwards and backwards and backwards. So he's not a viable option as a flex spot here. And then just looking at his bench here, he decides to bench Breece Hall for Khalil Herbert. That was actually a really smart decision. So I just let's just go through some of his players here. Jalen Hurts has a good day here, as we're talking about. 25 for 37, 319 yards and 2 touchdowns, 9 for 34 on the ground. As I mentioned, Khalil Herbert had a nice day here. Really breakout game for him. 18, 103, 5.7 yards per carry here. Terry McLaurin looked good, 8 for 10, 86 yards and a touchdown. And then, you just looking at his first round pick, number 2 overall, Travis Kelce, 6 for 9, 60 yards. He was hurt his first game. Jacksonville, he had 10 points, 16 was the high watermark in week 3, and then 9. If you're going to take a tight end that high in the draft, he needs to be better than the number 6 tight end in fantasy. And you need better numbers out of this. You need, over 100 yards, 8 catches sort of thing. And he's just not seeing that as the Chiefs offense is still figuring it out through 4 weeks.
Yeah, and you need a couple of those 25-point games because you need a few. You're relying on him carrying your team, and he just hasn't had that type of week yet. Only the 6th ranked tight end currently in the league. And as I try to navigate back to this game, which I just clicked off of, I do want to talk about the running back depth here. You mentioned that he sits Breece Hall. He ends up starting a wide receiver in his flex position, so only starting 2 running backs. Javonte Williams, who has not looked good on the year generally. He's just not 0 touchdowns on the season despite, being the lead guy in Denver. He leaves this game with an injury. The reports are that he's not expected to miss much time, but McLaughlin, out of nowhere, probably going to be a significant waiver wire target this year. You still have Samaje Perine getting a little bit of work. This could very well turn out to be a 3-headed backfield for the Broncos, with Williams hurt this early in the season and just not playing very well.
Not playing very much either. I mean, under 50% snap count each of the first 4 games.
Exactly. So I worry about that. I don't know. Even if he plays this week, I don't know if you can start him. I think I would probably get Breece Hall back in the lineup. Obviously, the matchup maybe against the Chiefs, he was thinking might be a little bit tough. But next week at Denver, I think Breece Hall has to be back in the lineup.
And Javon Williams is against the Jets, who is no small feat for running backs. So I think that is definitely something you have to look at. Picked in the 6th round. So a little bit of draft capital spent for Brian here on a very disappointing player so far through 4 weeks. Here.
Yep. I mean, I guess if there's good news, it's that Devontae Smith was targeted 9 times. Terry McLaurin, nice game, targeted 10 times. So at least there's targets getting to the wide receivers. Wan'Dale Robinson, a nice, I guess that was probably a free agent pickup. A guy that has flashed before in his career. Staying healthy has always been his issue. Consistency. He plays 64% of the snaps in just his second game for the Giants this season.
Yeah.
5 for 6 through the air. So potentially a future startable commodity on the bench there for Brian. And the sneaky pickup last week that I actually missed of Keaton Mitchell for the Ravens. How quickly this young speedster, he can actually climb the ranks of the not very good Ravens running back room. We shall see, but may have the most speed of anyone on the team at that position. Stashed him on the IR. I think he possibly could be taken off of the IR pretty soon.
Yeah.
Just an interesting name that we may be talking about later in the year. Especially as injuries just continue to rack up for the Ravens.
And that's particularly savvy from Bryant, who, he just needs to do dart throws at the running back position right now. I mean, any hope of anyone getting a job is definitely something Bryant needs to either spend FAAB money on or find in the free agent pickup. So good on Brian there. Okay, and let's go to our next matchup here with Tom versus Dustin here. Tom with the huge victory here, 171.14 to 109.26. Tom now goes 3-1 on the season. Dustin is now 2-2. Starting with Tom's team here, Lamar Jackson has a great day. Only throws the ball 19 times, but has 2 touchdowns through the air and 2 touchdowns on the ground for a grand total of 28 points. David Montgomery here, my goodness, I don't think anyone saw this coming. 32 carries, 121 yards, and 3 touchdowns on the ground to lead Detroit in their win against Green Bay. Stephon Diggs, the favorite target of Josh Allen, 6 for 7, 120 yards, and 3 touchdowns in that shootout in Miami. And then looking at that, his defense, which, I mean, we've now talked about 2 defenses now, but, now has 27 points after, week 1 they had 39, week 2 they had 17, week 4 they have 27. Definitely one of the most important, I would say, a defense that could really carry his team when he does have low point totals. For Tom, 171 is another great score for Tom. I think he is number 1 in points scored in the BWI. What did you think of... But actually, let me ask you a question first. David Montgomery and versus Jahmyr Gibbs, I don't think any fantasy football analyst really saw this coming. But looking at his snap count, 79%, 45% was hurt week 3, and then 71%. Do you foresee David Montgomery being a top 15 running back going forward with this split?
I think at this point, the proof is in what he's done, accomplished on the year. He's the number 9 running back. He's getting a ton of work. He only played 71% of snaps this week, but had 32 carries. So whatever question there was about that split, I mean, he's a workhorse right now.
Yeah.
I don't know compared to other running backs in the league, but I mean, he's getting the work for sure and making a lot of it. 3 times into the end zone. I know a lot of fantasy analysts are a little bit annoyed because Jahmyr Gibbs is kind of the guy that everyone put their chips on Gibbs coming into the season. But Montgomery, if you're the Lions right now, why would you get away from him?
Yeah.
Ride him, and this team is playing well. They've got rhythm on offense, and he's making the most of his opportunities. So good for Montgomery. Definitely got a good value there. Let's see. When did Tom get him in the draft? Tom got Montgomery in the 7th round. So a 7th rounder playing the way he's playing, I mean, that is a huge win for Tom.
Yeah.
You look.
Well, who would you rather have, Javonte Williams in the 6th or David Montgomery in the 7th? I mean, talk about the tale of two different running backs here. David Montgomery has just been unbelievable in his role with Detroit.
I mean, guys taken before him include Rachaad White in Tampa, James Conner, who's been playing well, but then you've got Pacheco and Swift.
Yep.
Swift's played pretty well, but
Pacheco had a good game too, as well.
Dalvin Cook went ahead of him. I mean, really, really good to see. And just in terms of draft positions, his players are playing up to the values that he got him at. Lamar Jackson right now is the 4th ranked quarterback. I think he was the 5th quarterback off the board in the draft behind Mahomes, Allen, Hurts, and Burrow. Stephon Diggs, he was the 4th wide receiver off the board in the first round. He's the number 4 wide receiver in fantasy right now. So a lot of just guys that are living up to their draft capital for Tom. That's the reason why he put up 171 points. He's 3-1, the number 2 ranked team in the league at this point, and the highest scoring team to this point. So just a lot of, and this is without Devontae Adams getting into the end zone. This is without Zay Flowers doing very much. This is with Darren Waller just not looking very good. The Giants' offense not looking very good. Yeah. This is with Tank Dell not showing up this week. So a lot of big performances, a lot of struggles, but Tom has enough talent on this team to withstand and put up huge point totals, even when he has some down players.
Yeah, I mean, if you're looking at Tom throughout his history in the BWI, I mean, over the last 2 seasons, very quietly has, amassed insane amount of talent on, his last 2 teams. He was in the Fantasy Football Championship last year, and now, I mean, he looks poised to make through 4 weeks at least, to make a deep postseason run with a lot of talent on his squad. Anything else to add for Tom?
I would just say, Dameon Pierce on the bench. Okay. The Texans' offense, to me, has outperformed expectations. Frankly, so is their defense. But I think C.J. Stroud in that offense, it's a competent offense. And Dameon Pierce, I think he's starting to put it together slowly. He's sort of a low-end RB2 at this point, but I like his prospects moving forward. He's got 2 straight games over 10 fantasy points. That could not be said in the first 2 weeks, but he's had a better performance these last couple. 24 carries, by far his season high here in this game against Pittsburgh. Now, they were ahead in that one, but they do have some somewhat favorable matchups. Nothing too tough on the schedule coming up. Got Atlanta, you got New Orleans, got Carolina. So some teams that they may be in competitive matchups with. But I think that he's a guy that I would be potentially thinking about getting back into the lineup as we move forward.
Yeah, and I mean, I think teams now have to respect C.J. Stroud. I think that he's shown enough that, defensive coordinators are going to have to plan around him. He's not just, a clueless rookie quarterback. I think he knows what he's doing, which will allow Pierce to not face 8-man fronts, have more favorable defenses to go against. So I think the sky is the limit for him, and he's only playing 60% of snaps. If we can get that up to like 75, 77% of snaps, I think there's the opportunities there, and I think he's starting to take it. So
let me ask you one more question about the team before we move off of it, because there's a couple really interesting names on the bench, and I want to get your take on this.
Okay.
Rashee Rice, Jameson Williams, 2 young wide receivers on the bench. Jameson Williams returning from suspension this week. Or will be returning from suspension. Which of those 2, if you were on the waiver wire for some reason and you saw both of those names, which of those guys are you targeting and why?
Oh boy, let's look here. So Rashee Rice is a very crowded room, but it's not very impressive. It's like Sky Moore, Kadarius Toney, Valdez-Scantling. You have Travis Kelce who's going to take up a lot of targets. And then in Detroit, you got Amon-Ra, Josh Reynolds, Sam Laporta in terms of targets. If I was in Tom's position, if I was speaking for Tom and I had the opportunity to pick one of those 2 players, you're taking Williams all the way. He is the more unknown. I think you don't know what you're going to get, and I think with Tom's position that he's in, you want to make high risk, high reward kind of picks here, because you have so much depth in your starting positions here. You can afford to take a big swing and a miss if it happens that way on a guy who's very talented. I think he was drafted in the 1st or 2nd round last year, so definitely the talent's there. He just hasn't been on the field. He's more of an unknown, but I think that with the way Tom's roster is constructed, you definitely want to take. You can take these bigger risks on that type of player.
Very interesting. I think I would go the Rashee Rice route. I think they're both equally risky, but I think the potential for Rashee Rice to be the number one receiver with a better quarterback in Kansas City than Williams has, both good quarterbacks, but the way Patrick Mahomes, if it turns, and you said it yourself, lots of guys there, but no one really leading the pack.
Right.
And so I think Rice could potentially become the number one in Kansas City. I cannot say the same. Of course, your boy, Amon-Ra St. Brown, ahead of him in Detroit. So I think I would take the Rashee Rice, but just two interesting names to watch out for.
Well, I guess both of them, so it doesn't really matter. You can hold on to them both, so it doesn't really matter for Tom there. But let's go over to the losing side here. Dustin now 2-2, 109.26 of a very respectable score, but when you're going against a juggernaut like Tom, that's not going to do. And starting with his problems was Kirk Cousins, 12 for 19, 139 yards passing, 2 touchdowns, and 2 interceptions, which should have been a plus matchup for Kirk Cousins against Carolina, but does not pull through for Dustin. Kyrie Williams, though, and we're going to talk about, I think, throughout the season, his 3 FAAB purchases after week 1. Kyrie Williams, 25 for 103, 2 touchdowns. He is the guy in LA for the Rams. Very savvy pickup for Dustin there. Jahmyr Gibbs, we were just talking about, only gets 8 carries, 40 yards, 4 for 5 through the air, and for 11 yards. I think that he's a shaky flex play, maybe a solid flex play. I wouldn't say he's a RB2 for this squad, so definitely something to keep in mind for Dustin. Puka Nacua, who is like the best name to say ever, 9 for 10, 163 yards, and finally gets in the end zone to win the game against the Colts, his first touchdown of the season. Huge pickup. It'll be interesting to see how his role changes with Cooper Kupp now coming back in week 5. Be very interesting to see where his target share goes after that. And then Marquise Brown, 7 for 10, 96 yards, good day. Kyle Pitts, though. I feel like we've been talking about this for 3 years. The talent is there, they're just not utilizing him. Only goes 2 for 21 this week.
Yeah, and I don't know what you do with him. I mean, Dustin doesn't roster another tight end at this moment. There's, as we know, tight ends are hard to come by in free agency and on waivers. I don't really see a whole lot of bench trade commodities. Maybe Gabe Davis. Maybe you package Jonathan Taylor up with somebody. Jonathan Taylor coming back this week potentially. I think he was practicing perhaps today. I may have seen that. But yeah, no, I don't know what you do at the tight end position. It's definitely a hole in this lineup. 29th best tight end in fantasy at the moment. Not going to cut it for Dustin. Not even potentially the top target in Atlanta at the tight end position. I mean, Jonnu Smith came out of nowhere to dominate in this week 4. But you mentioned it. The acquisitions, in my mind, are the big story here. Puka Nacua, 26 points. Kyren Williams, also 26 points. Both of them continue to have a whole lot of work in that Rams offense. I mean, it makes me nervous a little bit having both guys in the same offense, but they've been producing. You're right. Kupp is definitely the X factor. I mean, at the very least, Dustin can rest at ease knowing that he got some good weeks out of these guys. Even if they come down a little bit, they're still start worthy. I think both of them. That offense in Los Angeles looks good. They're spreading the ball around. And, Dustin's team, I'll say it again, even though he's the second lowest scoring team through 4 weeks in the Beltway Wars Invitational, guys like Jalen Waddle here, 6 fantasy points, so much potential for him to get going, but Dustin needs them
and
to
even
start.
Ja'Marr Chase. I mean, the potential, but the production has not been there.
Yeah, we talked about Tom's team being really good. These guys are living up to the draft capital that was spent to acquire them. Dustin, it seems to be a little bit the opposite. Chase, Ja'Marr, I'm always fucking open Chase, right? The comment he made. Yeah. Maybe there's a little bit of squeaky wheel, but at this point, I don't know how much squeaky wheel it can be with a quarterback that cannot plant, cannot launch, cannot throw deep. Burrow's just not right. The Bengals are not right, and it's a problem when your number one pick in the draft is just not performing. He's been targeted. He's just not doing very much. I mean, does he even have a touchdown on the season? No, he doesn't. He does not. So really being held back by Burrow's injury. At what point do the Bengals, at what point do they just need to play their backup quarterback? Honestly, 3 points this past week, right?
So,
was it 3?
Yeah, so why wouldn't you bench him this week and then hold him out to the bye? And then hopefully after the bye you go on a run. Because they're not going to win football games. Is what they're doing right now. Like all the defenses are playing close. They're playing on the receivers. They're blitzing. They're trying to get him to move. He can't move. It's really just a dumpster fire right now in Cincinnati, and on offense that we thought was going to be really historic, just not good. But one last thing on Dustin's team, a question I have for you: who are you higher on going forward? Puka Nacua or Cooper Kupp?
Oh, that's like apples to oranges.
But if you could pick one for the rest of the season.
Oh, it's Kupp. For
Kupp?
sure it's Kupp.
Okay.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, no doubt about that. I still like Nacua for, obviously the value that Dustin paid for him to get him. In a PPR league, I like him more because he is getting a lot of targets. Maybe that'll go down with Kupp. It should definitely go down with Kupp, but you just can't argue with the fact that he is going to be a piece of this offense. And, I think Kupp might get the touchdowns potentially, but I think Nacua is still going to be involved. So I like both of them.
And this is just one final point on Dustin's team. In the past, if you had a lot of holes in your offense or in your fantasy lineup, you were only getting one of these three guys. Through the waiver system. He got all three because he spent the money to get them. So you can really change your fantasy outlook by spending a little FAAB money and getting a little lucky there. But it's definitely a lot different than what we had in the past in terms of free agent acquisitions. Okay, and now let's go to our third matchup of the week with Sarah versus Scott here. Sarah with the 147.40 score against Scott's 128.82. They are now both 2-2 on the season. And Pat, let's just start with Sarah's squad here. A nice day for Justin Fields. I know that she's been waiting forever to say that from this podcast. 28 for 35, 335 yards, and 4 touchdowns through the air. Kenneth Walker had a good day against the New York Giants here. The hapless Giants, 17 carries, 79 yards, and a touchdown. A.J. Brown, we had a bet about A.J. Brown being a top 15 wide receiver. It's not looking so great for me right now. 9 for 13, 175 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Talking about squeaky wheels, get the grease. Definitely was squeaky to Jalen Hurts. Even Drake London here, only 20 yards, but gets it into the end zone here. And Chris Godwin with the Mike Evans coming out of the game early in the season, 8 for 11, 114 yards. Sarah goes 2-2. Just looking around at her squad here, a lot of good points. But my focus now is Drake London, who's her third wide receiver. 3 for 7, 28 yards, and a touchdown. The passing offense in Atlanta is not very good, but I do see brighter days ahead for Atlanta if they keep losing and there could be a quarterback change. Do you think Drake London is kind of a buy low right now?
Potentially. Taylor Heineke, the backup quarterback for the Falcons, formerly of the Commanders. Maybe. I'm not
he's
excited
better than
about
Desmond Ritter. We had to.
Yeah, but I'm just not excited about it. This offense has not looked good. We talked earlier about Kyle Pitts. Lots of bad vibes going on for me. I think he's one of these ultimate boom or bust wide receivers. He's been more bust than boom so far, has gone up against some tough, challenging defenses. His schedule will open up a little bit. with Washington in a couple weeks, potentially Minnesota not too far down on the schedule. But he's just a really hard guy to trust for me. So I don't know. I'm out on Drake London. I'm out on the entire Falcons team outside of Bijan Robinson at this point.
Yeah, it's just he has so much talent, but they just don't throw the ball. I think that's there, and Desmond Ritter's just kind of doing his thing, and it doesn't appear that they're going to go away from him to the detriment of Atlanta, because I don't foresee them winning many more games with Desmond Ridder at the helm. But Sarah had a great week, and with Justin Fields, if he goes, this team's going to go. With the amount of draft capital that she spent on Justin Fields, getting 27 points and him finally figuring out his passing percentage problems, definitely good to see. And she made the right decision because, the past couple of weeks has kind of been the decision. Are you going to start Daniel Jones? Or are you going to start Justin Fields? She made the right decision, and it paid off for her with a win in week 4.
Yeah, look, I want to just shout out Sarah, by the way, because here's how her season's gone, right? She loses her first 2 games. She loses Nick Chubb in week 2.
Yeah.
She ponies up and replaces him with Jerome Ford, who she gets from the Fab system, spending $50 to get him, but needed to spend that $50. The next highest bid, I think, was $41. And she's now won the last 2 weeks, and she's put up some damn good point totals. 137 last week in a win over Jake, and 147 this week in a win over Scott. So props to Sarah for sticking to it, despite, it's disheartening to lose your top draft pick, but she's stuck with it. She's made some good lineup decisions. There's not a whole lot of depth on this team, so not a lot of decisions to be made, to be honest, but she's making the right decisions. She's back to 2-2. She's got some bye week trouble coming up this week, but hey, hang around. She's number 5 in the Beltway Wars Invitational at the moment. And as you know, we have 7 teams making the playoffs now out of 12. So props to Sarah for and for chugging the beer, being the first to successfully do that. We're somehow talking about hazers and other things now. I don't know how we got that far. Sarah, good work this early in the season, despite some fantasy heartbreak with Chubb.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely took advantage of the FAB system. Got Ford, definitely startable as a number 2 running back going forward there for Sarah. But let's go over to Scott here. Kind of a disappointing loss with 128 score. Usually if you score that much, you get a win, and that did not happen this week. Starter Russell Wilson, only quarterback on the roster, 21 for 28, 223, and 3 touchdowns on the day. 22 solid point total for a quarterback. Tony Pollard, a little bit, you're looking at the score and you're thinking that, with them, so far ahead of New England that he'd be a lot better than this, but only 11 for 47, 3 catches through the air, only 7 points on the day. Isaiah Pacheco, though, the complete opposite, 20 carries, 115 yards, and a touchdown against the Jets. And then just, kind of the story of his week was the inconsistency and the lack of production from his wide receivers. Amari Cooper, 2 points. Michael Pittman, 4 points. Tutu Atwell, only 4.9 points. So that really sunk his ship for week 4. But then also, finally Mark Andrews gets on the board, 5 for 5, 80 yards, and 2 touchdowns on the week. So some bright, some not. Just this wide receiver problem seems like it's going to be a year-long problem for Scott.
Yeah, for a lot of these wide receivers, it has to do, in my opinion, with the quarterbacks that they're playing for. Amari Cooper, inconsistent in Cleveland. Of course, you have the backup starting this past week against the Ravens. Watson missed this game. Pittman in Indianapolis, 1 for 5, not great. Everyone is really excited about the situation there, but I just haven't seen it with Pittman consistently enough yet to feel like I can trust him. Maybe it was just a down week. He did have huge target share the first couple weeks. He's gotten into the end zone once. I just don't think that if that offense is as efficient as you would hope it would be, and you're going to have down weeks with growing pains for the rookie quarterback there. So Pittman, 4 points. And then Hopkins. You're in Tennessee. You're playing with Tannehill. When he signed with Tennessee, I said, really? That's the offense you want to play? You want to catch passes from Ryan Tannehill? Not looking very good right now, and a guy who you may end up seeing on the bench. 3 straight weeks under 10 fantasy points, wide receiver 50 right now. This week could have been much worse for Scott had the Jacksonville Jaguars not posted a huge game against the Atlanta Falcons, 22 fantasy points. So that made the score look even a little bit better than it was. He does have Cooper Kupp returning. Tutu Atwell will find the bench very quickly, I think, for this team. He's got to hope that Russell Wilson can continue to play at the level he's been playing. We'll see if that's the case. Tony Pollard, better days ahead. But I will say Tony Pollard, I don't know if it was game script, but 53% of snaps, not great for a workhorse running back. A little bit of worry there. Only 11 carries, as you say, when they were leading the game. But my question to you here is about Isaiah Pacheco. All of a sudden, he's the number 12 running back, so a low-end RB1 for Kansas City. Started the year with a couple struggle fests. His snap percentage hasn't gone up dramatically, but his performance and his carries have. He's into the end zone 2 straight weeks, 15 or more carries 2 straight weeks. Certainly appears to be the guy. A couple guys behind him there, including Clyde Edwards-Helaire. But Pacheco seems to be the guy. Do you feel confident that the last 2 weeks of Pacheco are more reflective of who he's going to be than the first 2 weeks?
I definitely do. I think he's more of the last 2 weeks than the first 2 weeks. And, just looking at his snap percentage, last week he had 60%. I think that's what you're going to be seeing going forward, plus 60%, more opportunity, more points. You're always going to have Jarrett McKinnon there. You're always going to have Clyde Edwards-Helaire there to kind of spell Isaiah Pacheco every once in a while. But he's the guy. He looked great against the Jets. He was 5.7 yards per carry. He had a touchdown. He's just the most talented running back on that roster. And I think that as they're trying to figure out the wide receivers and trying to get them on the same page with Mahomes, I think that they're really going to just rely on Pacheco when they don't have that chemistry going. As you saw it here, season high in attempts, season high in yards, even season high in reception yards. I think you see more of that going forward. You gotta love the way that he is trending for Scott, and it's definitely really needed out of that number 2 running back spot. So good days ahead for Pacheco.
More than 4 yards per carry in each of the last 3 games. 2 of those close to 6 yards per carry. So nice work on the ground for Pacheco.
Since we're doing this, he was drafted in the same round as Javonte Williams in the 6th round. So definitely a good pick there, and it's going to work out for Scott, I think. But better days ahead for Scott, 2-2. Can't be too ashamed about that. All right, and let's go to our next matchup here with Jake versus Alex here. The battle of the 0-3s, and Jake comes out on the winning side, 137.28 to 112.98. Let's go over to Jake's side here. Justin Herbert has a nice day here with only 24 attempts, but has a touchdown in the air and 2 rushing touchdowns on the ground. You're not going to see that very often for Justin Herbert. Christian McCaffrey continues to be the best running back in the universe. 20 carries, 106 yards, 3 touchdowns on the ground. And then, just to top it off, 7 for 8, 71 yards, and a touchdown through the air. Love to see that. Zach Moss, 18 carries, 70 yards. That's okay. But the real story here, even though he won, Chris Olave, not 1 point. Christian Watson came back from injury, 2 for 4, 25 yards, does save his day with a touchdown. Jared Jeudy, only 52 yards. Luke Musgrave gets hurt in this one. And then it gets a big, 17 points out of Tampa Bay, interception, 3 sacks, 2 forced fumbles for Jake here. Just looking at Jake's squad here, Christian McCaffrey, heck, he was drafted. Okay, he was drafted number one over. No, he was drafted number 3 overall. So, do you think Brian is regretting his Travis Kelce pick for Christian McCaffrey, who went 1 pick after him? Probably so. But my main question is Zach Moss. Looking at him, you have Jonathan Taylor coming back this week. I think Jake's losing that value there with Jonathan Taylor coming back. I mean, looking at his bench, what do you think the plan is for Jake here for his number 2 running back?
Well, he's going to play the matchups with Najee Harris and with Rachaad White. Probably White will get the majority of those starts, but Najee Harris showed some signs of life in this terrible Pittsburgh offense. He did have his best week of the season, at least in terms of just his fantasy stat line for the week. He not much to say there. I mean, just 10 fantasy points, but it's a lot better than he has been over the first couple weeks. So I think you'll probably play those 2 matchups. I haven't looked too much here at the wide receivers. Maybe get a wide receiver in that flex position. Probably Romeo Doubs may prove that he could stick around. He, of course, has been good in the absence of Christian Watson. Watson back now. Jake, the Packers fan, we'll see if he ever starts both of those guys. It might be a risky thing to do, but he's got to hope that Najee Harris kind of turns it around, and maybe this 14 for 71 day for Harris is enough to get him going. But that Pittsburgh offense just doesn't look very dynamic at the moment. Whether it's Trubisky or Pickett, he's not looked very good. So a little bit light there, but elsewhere on this team, I mean, Christian Watson, we just mentioned that he's coming back from injury. This was a guy last year that was one of the bigger surprises. Jordan Love is proving to be a startable fantasy option, let alone a very good NFL quarterback. Happens to be on Jake's bench here. He's the number 3 quarterback in fantasy. But I'm really thinking about him as just a proposition for Doubs and Watson. Potentially they're both viable. Potentially they both are startable assets for Jake in this on this fantasy team. Chris Olave has a down game here, but he's been, he hasn't had that blow up 20-point game yet, but he's been pretty consistent with targets and fantasy points and snap percentage so far on the year. A good matchup against New England. So I think it was a down week for Jake, even though he gets the win, 137 points. You mentioned the big performers. He got it from Herbert, McCaffrey, and the Buccaneers defense and Brandon McManus, the kicker. The rest of the team really struggled to produce, but I think better days ahead. Jake gets his first win of the season. I like this team moving forward, I think, and I think Jake, Herbert right now, he's a little bit banged up, but he's the number 1 quarterback in fantasy. I think that gives him a shot for sure.
Yeah, I tend to agree with Justin Herbert. I mean, as he did invest a lot of draft capital in him. It does seem to be paying off for Jake and Christian McCaffrey. My goodness, I mean, what else can you say? I mean, the whole offense runs through him. It's very good for Jake as that happens, as long as he can stay healthy, which history proves that he might not be able to stay healthy, but if he can, it should be good for Jake going forward.
Yeah, gosh, there's really no one else that is as good for 20 fantasy points a week as Christian McCaffrey, and he's done that this season. So just crazy impressive.
Going over to our next matchup, or our next team here is Alex. Trevor Lawrence, that Jacksonville offense does not look great. 23 for 30, 207 yards, and a touchdown. 8 carries for 42 yards, so that's kind of interesting there. Trevor Lawrence has not gone over 18 fantasy points thus far this season. Bijan Robinson continues to be, the only fantasy viable option there. In Atlanta, 14 carries, 105 yards, 5 for 5 through the air. Josh Jacobs, who we talked about last week, as a struggler, has a redemption week. 17 carries, 58 yards, and a touchdown. 8 for 11 through the air for 81 yards. You love to see that out of your running backs. But now some of the bad news here. T. Higgins leaves this game early, 2 for 4, 19 yards. Unsure what his injury status is for Week 5. It says that he's not ruling himself out for Week 5. So interesting there. George Pickens, that whole Pittsburgh passing attack has been abysmal this year. 3 for 7, 25 yards. on the air. And then George Kittle, I know both of us weren't very high on him in the draft process. 1 for 1, 9 yards, just not needing to be used for San Francisco. Leave him in. He's a great blocker. That's probably why Christian McCaffrey's been so good there in San Fran. And finally, I think we can finally say that DeAndre Swift has the chokehold on that Philly backfield. 14 carries, 56 yards, and a touchdown. 4 for 4 through the air. Even in a loss, I do like this team. But my main question is, what do you do with Trevor Lawrence here? Is there anything? I mean, is it gone to a point where he's not a ride or die starting fantasy option where you just plug and play? Or maybe there's someone on the, in the free agency, Matt Stafford comes to mind. Some of those types of players that you might start playing matchup based with in terms of Trevor Lawrence or another quarterback.
Well, I mean, Jared Goff is on his bench, and Jared Goff right now being the number 14 quarterback in the league, Lawrence the number 19 fantasy quarterback. So absolutely, yes, it's matchup dependent for sure. Now, granted, Lawrence has had a couple somewhat difficult matchups. Houston defense we talked about earlier in week 3, KC in week 2. In what could have actually been a really high offensive game, it was a pretty subdued, like 17-9 win for the Chiefs. But yeah, I know. I think absolutely you're playing the matchups with Goff and with Lawrence. Goff, you could make the argument that right now that Lions offense looks a lot better than the Jacksonville Jags offense. So for sure, I think that's the case. But that decision is, to me, the least of the worries here for Alex. With T. Higgins out and struggling with the Bengals, even if he plays, I mean, frankly, you kind of, if he's even a little bit banged up, you almost hope that he sits, because if you're going to start him, you've seen what this Bengals offense is without Burrow healthy. So I don't know. You look at his draft, T. Higgins, he took in the 3rd round, but that was the only wide receiver he took in the top 6 rounds.
Yeah, he definitely waited.
He went running back. We've always said this year, all of these podcasts, including the draft wrap-up, we said he's going to need production out of his receivers that he waited on, and I don't think he's getting it very much. So this week, to me, is very much what I would expect Alex's weeks to be like. It's his 2 studs, Bijan Robinson and Jacobs, going for double digits, having really good weeks, but the wide receivers holding this team way, way, way down. And so, frankly, I think this is kind of who he is, who his team is. 1-3, number 11 in the league. So I don't know. I think the wide receivers need to be addressed. Not a whole lot on the waiver wire at this point at that position, in my opinion. So I don't know. Looking at these 2 teams, do you like? They're both 1-3. Jake is number 10. Alex is number 11, respectively. Do you have a preference to take over one of these teams right now for which one it would be?
Oh, man. Looking at this more, I would say that...
I told you on Jake, didn't I?
Well, I would say that Alex has more of a diversity of talent, where Jake has, 1 or 2 or maybe even 3 studs. So it's like, Jake has McCaffrey, who's number 1, Jay Herbert, who's number 1, and, you pick anyone else here. I mean, Olave, I guess you would say, is a stud. Not really showing it this week. But, Alex has Robinson, Jacobs. I do see better days out of Higgins and Pickens. I don't think it's their talent that is the problem. I just think it's their offenses that are just been really struggling. I do think that gets better as the season goes on, especially for Pickens. I'm not sure about Higgins just because I think the Bengals offense goes with Burrow's health, and that doesn't seem to be getting any better anytime soon. So I would say I would take Alex's team, but just by a hair. I think I like the broad talent of Robinson, Jacobs, Swift, and then you're just hoping that one of these wide receivers out of Reynolds, Pickens, or Higgins becomes like a top 20, top 18 option.
I hear you on Higgins and Pickens, but at what point in the season do they get it together? And by the time that they do, is
Yeah.
Alex going to be 1-5, 2-6, struggling to even stay relevant in this league? Pickens, we should say also, Deontay Johnson has been out. He will presumably be returning from short-term IR in the next week. After the bye next week, right? Or the Ravens bye, and then he should return. So
Yeah.
I don't know. We'll see. Hopefully Alex can get it together. And if he does hit on a receiver, I tend to agree with you, but I'm not seeing a lot of talent at that position at the moment.
Yeah, very interesting there. And going over to our next matchup here, we go to one of our co-commissioners, Pat versus Josh here. Pat now going 3-1 on the season, 106.68 to 78.92. Josh now going 2-2 on the year. Looking at Pat's squad here, Brian Robinson falls into the end zone, saves his day, 14 carries, 45 yards, and a touchdown. CeeDee Lamb, has a good game considering the game script and the way Dallas's defense was playing. 4-6, gets in the end zone there. But the main storyline for your team here was Nico Collins. My goodness. And that, are we going to call it high-flying Houston Texans offense now? 7 for 9, 168 yards, and 2 touchdowns. And, what should have been a pretty hard matchup. I mean, Pittsburgh does have some pretty good corners, so you love to see that there. 106.68 on the week. Not the greatest score, but you get the win. How do you feel after your week 4 performance?
Really fortunate. Not a good week at all. Underperformances from a lot of guys, including Tua against Buffalo, coming back down to earth after a crazy good week 3. And Aaron Jones Thursday night, not a good way to start off. Coming back from injury, reports that he'd be limited on a snap count sort of turned a little bit, and the reports right before the game were that he potentially could have a full workload. Started him with the hopes that he would, and he certainly did not. So still missing Saquon Barkley here. I think when I get him back, I think I may have one of the better running back cores in the league still, but we'll see. I mean, I think better days ahead for this offense. As you said, Nico Collins was the star here, and in big contrast to a guy like Calvin Ridley, who I was maybe which one of those is my RB or my wide receiver 2 and 3. Maybe they flipped. Maybe Collins is really a wide receiver 2, even though he's playing like a wide receiver 1. And it's the offense. We talked about both of these teams earlier. Ridley and the Jags have underperformed. They've taken a step back last year. Nico Collins and the Houston team with Stroud at the helm has really looked good. And Collins, nice to see him bounce back after Nico Dell. I'm sorry, after
you did Tank Dell and Nico Collins. Nico Dell, the perfect wide receiver.
I'm thinking of Tank Dell.
Yeah.
And then there's Tank Bigsby. So I get all of those guys kind of mixed up. But Tank Dell had a great week 3, and Collins was down, but this was a Nico Collins week. Very involved, 2 touchdowns, 7 for 9 through the air, 168. But lots of underperformances. Hawkinson struggled. The Vikings struggled in a win over Carolina. Cousins was bad in that one. So really fortunate to get a win, hoping to move on, hoping to get Barkley back, hoping to get Aaron Jones a little more healthy. Brian Robinson continues to sort of carry the flame a little bit while some of these guys are struggling with injuries. 14 carries, 45 yards, gets into the end zone here, 12 fantasy points. So mixed bag, down week generally, but fortunate to pull off a win against a team. For Josh is normally, you don't like to see Josh on your schedule when you're looking at subsequent weeks. He's typically a very high-scoring team, just barely escapes the punishment of the lowest scorer here. We thought it was going to be. He got upstaged late by Charlie, who we'll talk about next. But
Taser Charlie is what I'm calling him.
Taser Charlie, okay.
But yeah, I mean, as we'll talk about my team next, low point scorers, but getting a win, you can't apologize for that. I mean, you just got to take the wins and just move on. wins are hard to come by in the Beltway Wars Invitational. Going over to Josh's squad here, I think the main point of conversation here, other than Austin Eckler being hurt, is Joe Burrow. My goodness, another abysmal day. It wasn't even his lowest point total of through his first 4 weeks. His first week he went 3.8. Now he went 4.70. The 31st ranked quarterback in fantasy football. Going through his list here, really misses Austin Eckler as he has to go with Kenneth Gainwell and Miles Sanders. Both kind of just 5 points and 4.7 points. Garrett Wilson had a good day, 14 targets. You like to see that, 9 for 14, 60 yards. Adam Thielen continues to be really the only option there in Carolina, 7 for 8, 76 yards. And Brandon Ayuk with the big day here, 6 for 6, 148 yards, as the San Francisco 49ers continue to hum through the NFC West. Just looking at his team here, I mean, my main question to you is, are you starting Geno Smith over Joe Burrow going forward?
I think you have to. Obviously, I would look to free agency. I don't know who's available in free agency. I would look. I would take a look because, I mean, Burrow, is there a bigger fantasy disappointment than Joe Burrow right now in the National Football League? I don't think there is.
Let's think. There has to be one more. That's pretty bad.
I don't think there is because, and here's why I say that.
Okay. Well, Jamar Chase, maybe? I mean,
I guess, but he's like still what is he, the 28th ranked receiver?
Yeah, I'll look that up real quick when you keep talking.
Whatever it is. I mean, you got to take out of the conversation the guys that have missed games, because honestly, you would rather have a player that you drafted as high as Burrow miss games and avoid starting them, as opposed to what you're getting from Burrow, who's playing through a very obviously bad injury.
Yeah.
He's not able to be effective as a quarterback in the NFL right now. He's 31st in fantasy. You'd rather him sit and get healthy. I mean, you'd rather not have a decision to make.
But is it at the point now where, like, if you're looking from the Bengals perspective, where it's like, it's not going to be better this season. Like, no matter how long he sits, it's just not, like, it's
Was that the case?
I have no idea. But, I mean, it makes no sense what they're doing, so that I'm starting to think that's the case. I mean,
yeah.
It's just bad all around.
Absolutely brutal. I mean, fortunate to be 2-2, dealing with an Eckler injury, dealing with Burrow, has found production elsewhere, including Adam Thielen, and including Brandon Ayuk, who has performed like a top, like a wide receiver one for Josh. But, I mean, I'm not seeing a whole lot on this team aside from Eckler coming back. It's getting me too excited at the moment. We've talked previously about Garrett Wilson. That situation in New York continues to be terrible with Zach Wilson. He's still managing to be a low-end wide receiver 2 at the moment, but I don't know. I don't think you can win consistently with so many question marks in your starting lineup.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, kudos to Josh for even being 2-2 with so many, Joe Burrow, Garrett Wilson, Austin Eckler being injured, things of that nature would sink most teams, and he's 2-2, so you got to be fortunate with that. Hopefully it just gets better, but I'm kind of in your boat. I don't know how this gets better. Maybe with Austin Eckler just carrying the team, but you got to start going Geno Smith. I mean, I just think until Burrow can prove that he's healthy, which I don't know if he will this season, you got to go with a healthy quarterback, even if the ceiling isn't as high.
I think so. And, another guy that we should just mention here briefly, Miles Sanders has one good week, really, fantasy-wise, has gotten into the end zone just once. Under 50% of snaps. Did he leave this game with an injury? I can't remember. But
nope.
This Carolina Panthers offense doesn't look good. Bryce Young doesn't look good.
It just looks like a total rebuild. Is what it kind of looks like.
Absolutely. And I 13 carries for 19 yards. Just
his yards per carry last 3 weeks, 2.6 and 1.4.
Rough. As
Scooby-Doo would say. Rough.
To the point where we're hearing the name Chuba Hubbard, right?
Yeah.
Like
he has him on the bench. Yeah.
Yeah, so boy, picking between those two, if that becomes like a
Yeah.
timeshare, boy.
That just really just, bottoms out both of them if they're splitting carries. For Josh. And with our final matchup of the day, and with the low score, and this is very, very low scoring matchup here, yours truly beats Charlie 94 to 77.40. Going over to my squad here, started Anthony Richardson, which was, a great move and probably won me my matchup over Dak Prescott. Goes for 29.6 points. Really saves the day with the running, and, he really was struggling in the first half, but really came back in the second half. Alvin Kamara, I throw right in the lineup after his 3-week suspension. Has 13 for 14 through the air, 33 yards. So it wasn't great yardage, but he got targeted 14 times out of the backfield. I like to see that. Amon-Ra St. Brown, 5 for 7, 56 yards and a touchdown. But then I have some problems here. Mike Evans goes out with an injury. Pat Freiermuth has a multiple-week injury. And Raheem Mostert looked to take a backseat to Devon Achane. Got the win. You like to see that, but I do have a lot of questions going forward.
Yeah, a lot, even more than you mentioned. I mean, Joe Mixon continues to get the workload here, but we've already talked a lot about the Bengals' lack of offense. You mentioned Evans and Freiermuth and Mostert. Kareem Hunt, a guy that I think you were kind of sneaky playing to keep him around, maybe droppable at this point, just not really doing anything there. For the Browns, Ramondre Stevenson, a couple down weeks here, just 11 fantasy points in the last 2 weeks combined. He was in the 70s snap percentage the first 2 games. He's dropped into the 60s with a tough matchup against the Saints coming up. Zay Jones looks to be injured here. Did not play in week 4. Not sure what that is. Deontay Johnson, I guess, will be coming back from IR for you. But a lot of question marks. How are you just generally feeling about this team right now? You're 4-0. You're, of course, in a great position. You can maybe absorb a couple losses here due to injury. But how are you feeling about all these question marks? It seems like there's a lot of moving pieces.
Well, in terms of week 4, I got the win. So, I'm happy to see that, especially with a down week and some players going out of the games for injury, Mike Williams and Pat Freiermuth. So getting a win when you have 2 starters going out with injury is definitely a plus. I'm feeling okay. We were talking about the whole Bengals offense and Joe Burrow's health. That should really benefit Joe Mixon. And, the numbers don't stand out to you that great. But, 4.8 yards per carry against a very tough Tennessee front line, I think very bodes well. And I think the touchdowns are going to come. He only has 1 touchdown on the season. But my main concern right now is Raheem Mostert. I probably should have unloaded him when I had the chance. I think now it's the Devon Achane show there in Miami. Maybe Mostert is a flex option going forward, but that remains to be seen. I'm not as down on Stevenson as you are. I think that offense is bad right now, but I do think it's going to get better. Still above the 60% snap count mark, so he's not really losing any carries to. Let me check what Zeke's snap count was. He's still in the 40s, so it's about a 60-40 split there. Not that down on him. He can be a flex option if I need him to be. But I can't really complain. 4-0 on the year, and just try to keep it moving, try to get it with duct tape and hopes.
Yeah, I would say my concern is his yards per carry, which hasn't been above 3.3 in all 4 starts, going under 3 2 times so far this year. Let me ask you one other thing, because we've talked before on this podcast about your quarterbacks. Anthony Richardson, the electric rookie, and Dak Prescott, the seasoned veteran. Both wear white and blue, but is this going to be a decision for you moving forward? Richardson obviously got the better of Prescott this week. 2 tough matchups next week. Richardson has Tennessee, who has been pretty good on the defensive side of things, and Prescott has the vaunted 49ers defense. So not just next week, but moving forward, is this more of a Richardson has taken over the QB1 spot for you unless there is a really significant matchup disparity?
I don't even think it's matchup anymore. I think that he's starting no matter what. Just with the rushing itself, that keeps his floor very high. With my talent and my wide receivers, and even now with my running backs with Alvin Kamara, I just need them to be serviceable. And anything over 20 points is just chef's kiss. So I think with my thinking is just who is one. Is it Dak or Richardson that's more likely to get me to 20 points? And right now, I think it's Richardson. And I don't even think it's particularly close. So I think I'm going to be riding with Richardson, at least for the foreseeable future.
Yep, an excellent pick there. Prescott was your 9th round pick, Richardson in round 11. So great value there for Richardson.
Okay, and now let's go over to Charlie's side here, who was the low score of this week. Just reminding everyone, in case we don't get a video anytime soon, he was the low score this week. And leading off that was Patrick Mahomes having a un-Patrick Mahomes type game, 18 for 30, 203 yards, and a touchdown, 2 interceptions. I don't know if it was all the Swiftie pressure, Taylor Swift fans trying to force the ball to Travis Kelce. I have no idea, but he did not have a great game there. Who did have a great game was Derrick Henry, which we were kind of questioning. 22 carries, 122 yards, and a touchdown. Back to Derrick Henry form. You like to see that. But then the bad here, Deebo Samuel, 0.6 points. Addison here, 0 points. Dallas Goedert, 2 for 425. Jacoby Myers, 2 for 433. Just not a very good week for Charlie, but definitely, this roster is talented with, Samuel and Keenan Allen and Derrick Henry and, of course, Patrick Mahomes. Definitely better days ahead for Charlie. But only 1-3, too, as well. I didn't really think of that either.
Yeah, 1-3. It's really interesting how this played out because there was a point Sunday where it looked like the battle for last place this week was going to be either you or Josh, and it turned out that it was your opponent, Charlie, who got a really terrible Sunday night performance from Mahomes. Not what you expect. Threw just 1 touchdown, was picked off twice, was involved on the ground, 7
and
for
even
50.
The Chiefs' defense against a really plus matchup against the Jets, which I was really concerned about, but it ended up okay.
He ended up giving up a lot of yards in this one against the Jets, but just a really unfortunate week. Deebo Samuel and Addison there, both really talented players. Addison, just the sudden goose egg at the Panthers in that weird Vikings offensive struggle fest. But I don't know that there's a whole lot other to remark on. Derrick Henry is doing Derrick Henry things as usual. James Cook continues to prove me right to some degree. A guy that I said right out of the draft may have been my favorite draft pick of the entire draft. Charlie got him in the 8th round, and he's performing like a low-end running back 1. 14 fantasy points here for Charlie, one of his better performers. I don't know. What do you think about this team? We talked about 2 other 1-3 teams in Alex and Jake. We've got another one here in Charlie. What do you think the outlook is for this team? Is this season salvageable at 1-3? Is there anything on the bench that gets you excited here, or is he really locked into sort of getting great performances from Henry and Mahomes and hoping for production elsewhere?
I'm not too concerned for some reason. He's 1-3, so you don't like to see that. But I love Deebo Samuel. I love Keenan Allen, especially with Mike Williams out. And Addison isn't going to do a goose egg, probably not again this season. I'm also intrigued by Cam Akers, the ghost of Cam Akers there in Minnesota. Didn't get a lot of run, but went 5 for 40 and 2 for 2. He might start chipping away at that Alexander Madison chokehold job there in Minnesota. So a lot of talent here. And with Mahomes, you can't really count a team out. He can, drop a 40 game at any point. So I think better days ahead. I think this is probably the most talented 1-3 team in the league. It's unfortunate that through the first quarter of the season that he's 1-3, but definitely a team that can rack off a bunch of wins going forward.
Yeah, we should say Cam Akers, by the way, interesting kind of tidbit there. Kevin O'Connell, head coach of the Vikings, was his offensive coordinator with the Rams. So Certainly one of the reasons why they brought him in there. Madison, I think in the last couple weeks, Madison, I think, has been a little bit better. It may have lit a fire under him. But if this trend continues, 5 for 40 for Akers, a nice day, a little bit involved in the passing game, I'm afraid that this really could work out to be a little bit more of a split, rendering both of these guys borderline sort of running back twos, maybe a flex consideration for both of those guys at some point. It's an offense that we know doesn't have a lot of running touches to go around. They throw the ball a lot in Minnesota, one of the leaders in passing with that system. So we'll see, but certainly a bright spot for this team after a really terrible week.
Yeah, and with that is our week 4 recap of this week, and we enjoy doing this for you all, and we hope that you enjoy listening. If you have any suggestions of what you want to see or anything different, just let us know, and we'll put it into consideration. But anything else to add, Patrick?
No, just that we're into the bye week situation here in week 5. I believe it's 4 teams on bye.
Cleveland, Tampa,
I think Seattle,
and I don't
maybe
know.
one other team. So it'll be interesting to see. I happen to notice it only because I'm playing Sarah next week, who has her 2 starting running backs on bye.
The
Chargers as well, right? So we'll see. I'm looking forward to Jerome Ford and Kenneth Walker on bye for Sarah as I play her there. She may be starting AJ Dillon and maybe Devin Singletary or Kendra Miller, whoever it is.
Be careful of your fantasy karma, because you know Devin Singletary is going to go.
I was just going to say, whoever she starts is going to go off. It's very, very likely. So, but yeah, no, we're at approximately the third of the way through the season, approximately. So, just in terms of records, we've got some 3-1 teams, we've got some 1-3 teams. You're the only 4-0 team at this point. So I think things are shaping up to be pretty good here as we enter the bye week part of the season. So good luck.
Yeah, good luck, everybody, and have a good week. Bye.
We look forward to Charlie's video.
Yes. Bye.
If you enjoyed the show, please remember to like and subscribe on YouTube and Spotify.